Hello, welcome back to class. Today we will be talking about overhead accounting and absorption, overhead accounting and absorption. And in looking at this, we look at the classification and allocation of overhead, apportionment and reapportionment, over or under absorption of overhead. These are the things that we'll be looking at. And what are overhead? They're actually indirect, they are costs that cannot be easily traced to a specific product, job, or service. An example of this is the factory rent or rate, the factory manager's salary, power for machinery, and this depreciation of equipment. And it actually asks a central question on how do we fairly assign these collective indirect costs to individual products. And why it actually matters to look at overhead is to ensure accurate product costing, also to provide realistic pricing, and to ensure true profitability analysis. What are the classifications of overhead? We have by function, by behavior, and by controllability. By function, by behavior, and controllability. And when we talk about this, we talk about by function, it talks about factory. We talk about factory in terms of rent, the power, indirect labor, and in terms of admin, we have the office, salary, rent under the admin, and under the selling and distribution, we have the likes of advertising and delivery costs. When we talk about by behavior, overhead can be sectioned into fixed, variable, and semi-variable. When we talk about fixed, it's constant in total, like in terms of rent. When we talk about variable, it varies with output, for example, power. And when we talk about semi-variable, it's actually a mixed one. An example of this is the example of this is actually the maintenance. And when we talk about the controllability, the aspect of controllability as a classification of overhead is divided into two, which is controllable and uncontrollable. When we talk about the controllable, it can be influenced by a manager in terms of supplies, and for the uncontrollable, it cannot be influenced. And example of this is the allocated head office rents. What is the purpose of this classification? It's actually to be able to determine where costs go on the cost sheet. And another one is to aid in budgeting and decision making. And lastly, it's to support responsibility accounting. We have stages of overhead accounting. The first is the collection, the second is the distribution, the third is the reapportionment, and the last is the absorption. When we talk about the collection, it's actually the gathering of all overhead costs from source documents. And when we talk about the source document, we talk about invoices, payrolls, and some others. And the purpose of the collection is to record all indirect costs accurately. It is to record all indirect costs accurately. And the distribution, under the distribution stage, it actually means allocating and apportioning costs to all departments. And the purpose is to assign overhead fairly across cost centers. We also have the apportionment. And for this, we talk about transferring service department costs to production department, transferring of service department costs to the production department. And the purpose is to ensure that only production department bears the overhead. And lastly, the last stage is the absorption, where we talk about charging overhead to cost units using a predetermined rate. And for this, the purpose is to compute the total cost per product. Then let us look at apportionment and absorption techniques. This stage involves creating a department distribution summary, and the basis of apportionment we need to actually look into this. The goal is to use a basis that reflects the benefit received by each department, and common bases include the rent rate, heating, and air conditioning, where the basis of apportionment is actually the floor area occupied by each department. And under the lighting and electricity, we talk about the number of light points or units of floor area. Another is the power for machinery as a basis, and we talk about, overhead item, and we talk about the basis of apportionment in terms of horsepower, kilowatts, rating of machines. And for depreciation of machinery, we talk about the value of machinery or capital employed. And for insurance of machinery or building, the basis of apportionment is actually the value of assets insured. We also have the supervisory salary canteen cost, which the basis of apportionment is actually the number of employees in each department. And lastly, in terms of fire insurance, we have the basis of apportionment as value of stock or asset at a risk. Then looking at reapportionment of service department cost. Service departments like maintenance, canteen stores exist to support production department, and their cost must be reapportioned to production departments, just like I said before, so that all overhead are finally bought by the product. And the method of reapportionment are a direct redistribution method, we have the step down or sequential method, and we have the reciprocal service method. For the direct redistribution method, it's actually a service department cost, and that service department costs are treated or are apportioned directly to production departments only, ignoring the services provided by one service department to another. For the step down or sequential method, it's actually a method that recognizes service rendered by one service department to another, and reapportionment starts with the service department that provides the greatest service to other service departments and proceeds sequentially. And once a department's costs are redistributed, it is closed and does not receive any further costs. And for the reciprocal service method, it's actually the most accurate method which fully recognizes the mutual services provided among all service departments, and it involves solving simultaneous equations, and it is used when inter-service department work is significant. The last aspect that we are looking at in the module is the over and under absorption of overhead. And when we talk about over absorption, which is also over recovery, this actually occurs when the absorbed overhead, which is based on the predetermined rate, exceed the actual overhead incurred, and it indicates that the product or job have been charged with more overhead than was actually spent, effectively recovering excess cost, and it is treated as a gain in the cost account and is also deducted from the cost of goods sold. And to calculate this, it is actually absorbed overhead minus the actual overhead. When we talk about the under absorption, it is under recovery, and that's the opposite of the over absorption. And it's actually this arises when the absorbed overhead is less than the actual overhead incurred, and it signifies that not enough overhead has been charged to product or job, and therefore part of the overhead remains unrecovered. It is treated as a loss in cost account and added to the cost of goods sold. The calculation is the actual overhead minus absorbed overhead. In conclusion, overhead are indirect cost that requires a systematic process to be assigned to product, and the four stages journey, which is the collection, distribution, reapportionment, absorption, ensures fairness and accuracy. Absorption uses a predetermined overhead rate to charge overhead to product, and the machine hour rate is often the most scientific method, and differences between absorb and actual overhead result in over or under absorption, which must be adjusted in the cost account. Thank you for listening.